How do you get from a first draft to a finished one? Find out in this video series, continuing with story structure. Hi, I'm Iris Marsh, and I help indie authors with their manuscripts so they can publish with confidence. Within this video, you'll learn how to find your story's structure and how to evaluate it. Okay, we're going to continue with story structure. So first we're going to have a quick recap of what elements make up story structure. So we have the inciting incident, which is something that throws the protagonist's life off balance. So they have a certain goal, or they had a certain goal, and with the inciting incident, that goal is now changed or complicated. Then we have the turning point. So from this moment on, the protagonist can continue with their strategy. With the inciting incident, they developed a certain strategy to overcome obstacles that come along the way. But at the turning point, they can no longer use this strategy. And the turning point is either an action by a character or a revelation. So that's getting a new piece of information or interpreting an already known piece of information in a different way. Then that leads to a crisis. So this is the dilemma that rises from the turning point. This is a choice between two equally bad options. So for instance, choosing between safety or finding the truth, or two equally good options. So choosing between what's best for themselves or what's best for others. And then the climax is the choice the protagonist makes, and the resolution that shows the consequences the protagonist faces because of their choice. Then in the previous video, we've established the global structure, so now we're going to look at the act structure. And you can find the exact same 5 elements we just discussed within each act as you did on the global level, which means that Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 all have these 5 elements. So I like to split my story into 4 acts. So this is not my idea, that came from StoryGrid. So essentially then you split your Act 2 in half. And this way you can divide your story into roughly equal parts of 25%. I say roughly because it differs. For instance, in some story, Act 1 can be very short. Especially within action stories, sometimes it's only 10% or 15% of the entire story. And the middle, so Act 2, 1 and Act 2, 2, take up a larger portion, as well as Act 3. So if it's not exactly all 25%, that's totally fine. So some of the elements within each act you already have from establishing your global structure. So within Act 1, we have the inciting incident, which is the global inciting incident, and then the other points. Then in Act 2A, we have the turning point, which is the global turning point, and the crisis, the global crisis. Then Act 2B has all the 5 elements, and Act 3 will have the global climax and the global resolution. Once you've determined your structure for each act, you can evaluate your structure, so both your global structure and your structure per act, by asking the following questions. Does the inciting incident tie to the climax? Is the inciting incident resolved at the end? Does the turning point complicate from the inciting incident? Is the link between the turning point and the crisis strong enough? Do the turning point, crisis, and climax follow a consistent protagonist? And does the resolution tie back to the stakes established in the crisis? So let's see how that works. Here we have an example of Act 1 for my story. So in Act 1, we have the inciting incident. So remember, that's the global inciting incident that we already determined. Here, Nikki rejects a ritual to remove Loreen from her mind, as she does not want her powers back. She's afraid of what Loreen might do. Then the turning point. Nikki and Carter are confronted with Emily, whose powers are out of control. Carter can't contain this power on his own. The crisis. Put on the bracelet and risk Lorraine trying to control her, or let Carter take care of it himself, trying to calm down Emily without using her power. The climax, so this decision. Nikki puts on the bracelet to help Carter, but when she feels Lorraine trying to reach Carter through their connection, she pulls away. The resolution, Carter can't hold it, Emily's powers break through, which causes a small earthquake. Emily is shaken and Nikki's bracelet is now burned into her skin, so she has her powers back. And as I've already mentioned, we're going to evaluate this act based on the questions, but we already know from the conventions and expectations that my global inciting incident isn't right. So even though this might fit or not, I would still need to change the inciting incident and, as a consequence, the other elements within this act. But we can still evaluate it to see how well it fits or not. So we start with, does the inciting incident tie to the climax? And it actually does, because within the inciting incident, Nikki didn't want to remove Lorraine because it means connecting to her powers. So you want the inciting incident to promise the action that happens in the climactic moment. So the inciting incident here promises the climactic action, where Nikki has to use her powers and Lorraine indeed tries to control her. So it shows a change within Nikki, not using her powers to using her powers. So these two elements kind of mirror each other. Then, is the inciting incident resolved at the end of the act? So this question, each inciting incident kind of raises a question, and the question that arises from this inciting incident is, what will Lorraine do, and will Nikki never use her powers again? And as you can see, because this wasn't the right type of inciting incident, these aren't very interesting questions for a global inciting incident, right? So, however, these questions are somewhat addressed in the resolution, as we see Lorraine trying to control Nikki and we see Nikki using her powers again. And like I said, aren't the most interesting questions for a global inciting incident. A little side note, even though the resolution should have some resolve, you can leave some questions unanswered because you're still progressing through the story. Only when you really end the story should you have all the questions answered, otherwise the reader will keep having questions in their mind. If your story continues in a series, then again you can leave some questions unanswered. And find a balance between answering questions and leaving questions unanswered so that the readers do have some sense of satisfaction with the resolution, while also being excited to read further in the series. Then the next question, does the turning point complicate from the inciting incident? So based on the inciting incident, Nikki's strategy would be not to use her powers. However, I do feel it's a little unclear how her rejecting the ritual would build up to Emily being out of control. Like, there's no really clear tie here. The turning point does relate to Nikki's strategy, and it does undermine that strategy. So some things are good, some things could be better here. Then is the link between the turning point and the crisis strong enough? So I feel yes, the crisis comes directly from the turning point, and Nikki has to choose. She's forced to choose in this situation. There's a decision between two bad options, which is safety for herself, but a potential different kind of danger for others, versus danger for herself, but safety for others. Then, do the turning point, crisis, and climax follow a consistent protagonist? Yes, they all follow Nikki, so that's always good. You want those points to follow the same protagonist because these are the specific points that show a change within a character. So if the turning point and the climax, for instance, don't revolve around the same character, like if a different character would act on the crisis that another character experiences, then we don't see the growth within that character that has experienced crisis. and this limits our connection to that character, and it limits their character development. So it's important that these three follow the same protagonist. Then, does the resolution tie back to the stakes established in the crisis? You want your protagonist to suffer some kind of consequence, otherwise it invalidates the stakes in the crisis. So if everything is just too easy, or if the stakes were very dangerous, but then the protagonist makes their choice and then nothing really dangerous happens, like they don't really suffer the consequences, it will feel too easy and you will lose that connection with the reader. Here the resolution does tie back, because she initially chooses safety for others, this danger for herself, but then she decides to pull back when that danger is extended to Carter. And because of that decision, Doreen didn't take control, so both her and Carter are safe from that fate. However, it did cause this mini earthquake, which harmed some of the patients that were present. And Emily is also very shaken and doesn't know what's going on, and both her and Carter are still hurt, except it's more a physical hurt rather than the mental, psychological type of danger that they would be in if Doreen had taken control. And not to mention that her bracelet's now burned into her skin. So definitely consequences there. So I hope that gave you some idea of how you can evaluate your story structure. And once you've done that, what next? So evaluating both your global structure and each act structure allows you to spot weaknesses and areas of improvement in your story. So when all of this, also what we've talked about in the previous videos, is evaluated and analyzed, you can start creating a plan for improvements within your story. And that will be the topic of the next video. If you'd like some more tips on editing, you can sign up for my free self-editing course on the link in my bio, where you'll learn some more about each stage of editing and some tips on how you can do them yourself. And you can also buy my developmental editing guide, where I follow the same steps that I used in this video series. And you can get it with a 60% discount if you apply the code YouTubeEdits at checkout. For more information on types of editing or some other self-editing tips, you can have a look at my other videos, where you can go to my website and visit my blog. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to stay updated for more content. In the next video, we'll talk about how you can set up a plan based on all of the analyses we've done so far in this video series, so you can write your next draft. So see you then!